So before we get started in the presentation, we have a guinea pig, a brave soul who has offered to do his pitch, his 30-second elevator pitch for everybody, and then have the opportunity to then go back and rewrite it and adjust after seeing the presentation. So Max, do you want to go ahead and do your pitch real quick?
Yeah. Should I just go?
Yeah, why don't you, yep, go for it.
Great. I'm Max. Float was built for families, business owners, and young up-and-comers who want less risk and more sound financial decisions and need to know the credit situations of others, but the credit bureaus make it expensive, difficult, and intrusive. Float provides quick proxies for creditworthiness with free access and mutability between individuals to help customers overcome the lack of control and privacy of the standard credit report and achieve clear financial decisions and peace of mind faster than anyone else.
Awesome. Thanks, Max. Thanks for going ahead and going first. And now we're going to dive into the presentation. Sergey, I believe you're going to start.
Yeah, Max, thank you so much. And well, I'm sure we'll have others do the pitches, and we'll reflect on what everybody presented, and we'll go from there. So my couple of slides is to review what are the various considerations for the pitches, and three aspects that I would define. It's the timing, content, and the language that you use. I don't think it goes, I'm sure there's other intangibles, but these are the primary things that you need to be concerned about. Next slide. All right, so in terms of timings, you literally have 30 seconds. You don't have 3 minutes, you don't have 30 minutes, you don't have 3 hours. And you should keep that timing in mind. That's just about the time that you have in order for to hold someone's attention on the elevator pitch. And it's really, why is it called an elevator pitch, is because that's about 30 seconds that it takes you with another person in the elevator to get to their floor. So this is the assumption that you just have 30 seconds, and you should use it wisely. At the same time, you shouldn't just hurry through it and just make sure that you said your spiel. You need to take your time, slow down, and use your 30 seconds to give your elevator pitch. Next. All right, so in terms of the structure of the elevator pitch, is I like to think of elevator pitches from a formulaic point of view. In order for me not to get wordy in terms of presenting an elevator pitch, I try to break it down into multiple components and make sure that I don't skip any of the components, that don't add others, that don't necessarily add value to my elevator pitch. And the components that I usually try to highlight, it's trying to say very clearly, what does the company do? So number two is, who are we doing this for? What are the personas? Who is the audience? And if you have, if it's a three-sided marketplace and you have so many different personas, and you should choose what's called an always persona, which is somebody or always customer, somebody who's always going to be your customer regardless of all other personas. So just choose the primary, and you should try to, if you can, you should try to say, how is your company different from others, right? So how does it differentiate itself? It's not always, differentiation is not always the only competitive strategy. If you're pursuing a niche competitive strategy or a pricing competitive strategy, you might include that, you might skip it, it just really depends. But putting a quick sentence there or a half a sentence there in terms of how you're different would serve you well. Here's one of the examples of one of my companies. I refined this over the years, and it follows the structure that we're talking about. Conference by Wire, that's the company that I founded. It's an event streaming solution that brings live on-demand events directly to remote viewers over the internet. Unlike other solutions, it does not require significant infrastructure investment. So as you can see here, again, all the elements of the pitch are included. It's the event streaming solution. Who is this for? It's for the remote viewers. And how is it different? You don't need to invest a ton in equipment. I hope that that makes sense. And again, I try to think of things in terms of formulas, so it's just easier for me to come up with the rules of thumb, what should be and should not be in it. Any reflections on this, Jason, Rudy? What do you guys think?
It's very effective. No, it's great.
Cool. All right, next slide.
Hey, Sergey, the only thing I'd potentially just propose there is that you might consider some way to in some cases, I'm just thinking in your particular case, I think there's the potential for a more emotional connection to the person, depending on who you're sharing the elevator pitch with, that in something like that, that could get them really excited. Like maybe you share a specific example if you know of something that they might get excited about. So I think
absolutely
thinking about the the emotion psychology side is just the only other thing I would add.
If it's a true elevator pitch and you don't, somebody you just don't know well, it's you might not have an ability to add that emotional connection. But when you're doing a pitch to either your friends or investors, absolutely, you should include aspects that resonate with them, right? So, in particularly, Conference by Wire was formed at the time of recession, very similar. It was 2008. The idea coalesced itself when people just didn't have a lot of money for travel. So I think connecting emotionally to someone who goes to a lot of conferences and just saying, well, how much money you spend $20,000-$30,000 a year going to conferences? Well, you don't have to do this anymore. That's the emotional connection that absolutely would resonate with someone. It just speaks to them personally. So yeah, Kier, thank you so much for including that. It's an important aspect of it. All right, so keeping it simple is super critical. Just try to avoid any jargon that might be pretty native to you, but it's just not clear to anybody else. I've heard some pitches that contain 90% of it was just some sort of jargon and acronyms, and absolutely would not be understood by anybody who's not in the industry. So try not to include the acronyms, and as I said before, slow down. Try to make sure that the idea here is not to get to the end of the pitch, but make sure that the person that you're communicating with really understands what you're talking about. And one of the examples I've seen is, we're deploying illumination equipment in the redundant fault tolerant manner in a high risk environment, right? That's not a simple language, right? So, here's the translation, right? You're saying you're screwing in light bulb, standing on the ladder, and someone holding it for you, right? It's exactly the same content being communicated, but if you're trying to make it sound grandiose and it's more than it really is, it would just as likely to confuse somebody as to provide valuable content. Any reflection on it, guys? Michelle, Jason, Rudy.
And that slow down piece, that's so important. I was doing some elevator pitches in January at a big event, and the first 5 that I did, I spoke so fast and I didn't even take a breath. I think it's important with 30 seconds, it's intimidating, but at the same time, it's a long time, and I'll get into that a little bit. So just remember that it's okay to breathe while you give your pitch.
Absolutely, you should take a couple of breaths. Carrie, any thoughts?
Not at this point. Not additive.
Got you. But again, I hear jargon or acronyms being used time and time and time again. I'm sure if you listen to pitches a lot, then you there's just no way for you to miss. Or
sure.
the more complicated language is being used that could be instead replaced with simpler words and more understandable.
Yeah, I was even thinking about with Max's pitch. I could tell he was very deliberately trying to use simple language, which was great. But even with that, that's a difficult topic where there is a lot of jargon in financial services and in credit. And again, some of that's know your audience, as I think you're speaking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Max was presenting, was giving his pitch, there were multiple benefits thrown in, and sometimes that could be a little confusing, focusing on the core benefit. But as we're going to be going through the pitches, we'll have an opportunity to provide feedback and critique, and I think those are the finer points. Once you have been pitching for a while, and there's more advanced considerations enter in. But first, just make it understandable. All right, next slide. Sometimes elevator pitches are not really elevator pitches because you don't have 30 seconds. You literally have 10 seconds. And that sometimes is called a taxi cab pitch. And the reason it's a taxi cab pitch, just imagine you're opening up the door of the taxi, and somebody's coming out, and that's somebody that you know, and they ask you, "Oh, hey, what do you do?" And you give them a taxi cab pitch. It's literally not enough. It's not enough time for more than one sentence. So having a taxi cab pitch being more or less automatic, that you could at any point, if you're woken up in the middle of the night, you could say it, would be a good thing to have as well. Now, not every idea can be easily put into a taxi cab pitch. Taxi cab pitch has a very specific structure. So if you got next slide. So the structure of the taxi cab pitch is to try to communicate to someone your idea in terms of something that they're already familiar with, right? So this is just like that, only with this particular caviar, right? So Facebook for teenagers, or Flickr for video. Flickr started offering video a long time ago, but that was the example until they didn't, right? Or Uber for air travel, which I'm sure is just around the corner, but something that people can very easily relate to, right? Especially if your idea is closely related to something that's already on the market. Just try to think of it in that fashion, right? Because somebody will immediately go to what they understand, and they'll try to understand, and we'll try to add the distinction, and that distinction really becomes that taxi cab pitch. Any thoughts on this, guys?
One thing I wanted to jump in and say is the taxi cab pitch is super important, because there are going to be times where you have to be able to narrow it down as concise as possible with as few words as possible. But I would say it's not necessarily the same thing as your tagline. So if you're trying to get somebody to understand what your business is and what it does, you can use the Flickr for video, and people will get it and understand it because you're using that analogy. And so it's smart in that context. But you may want to have a different tagline so that because I see a lot of companies, there was kind of this trend that started happening where everybody wanted to be the Uber of blank, the Netflix of blank. And that, I think, gets in a marketing capacity, you want to be careful with that, but it is very valuable when you're explaining it to somebody in a quick period of time so they can understand that in 10 seconds.
I think one thing you can also do is, if there's a way to say what your purpose is in that little short bit, you know, I mean, if my purpose is I help people do this or that, then you might even be able to, who knows, start a conversation and be able to explain it further. But, you know, and this is 10 seconds. To go back to the last thing with the 30-second thing, I mean, in a way, if you think about it, I always tend to put things in a media perspective because I've been around media forever. But if you think about a commercial, that's 30 seconds. You can say a lot in 30 seconds, but they're very well polished, and there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so you're telling a story in some way, shape, or form. So in a way that even that 30 seconds is not a lot of time, it's actually in some ways an incredible amount of time. So
Rudy, I 100% agree, and I also think of it in terms of the commercial. This is a 30-second commercial, right? So if people cannot understand what you do in 30 seconds, then I think you need to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
It's an incredible amount of time.
Yeah, and I think even this, the tax cap pitch can be really useful for just helping really distill down to what is the core essence of what you do. I know as investors, we hate these if it is, as Michelle said, if this is sort of core to how you explain it. It's one thing to sort of use it as again, a way to distill things down, but if it becomes a core part of how you're trying to market yourself, I think in many cases it makes investors shy away because they feel like, well, there are going to be 100 people trying to do the Uber for air travel. So why you?
Yeah, absolutely. All by itself, it's not enough, right? But you could also be used, as you said, as a kernel of the idea, and you explaining it to yourself, right? And you see if you're deviating from your core mission.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I did want to jump in and say that I liked about what Rudy said is, from a sales context, your 10 seconds is to get somebody to want to respond, tell me more about that. So that's like your goal response that you want to get out of that, whatever it is that you say. So it can be a little bit more simple and it can be intriguing. If it's confusing or boring, you might not get that response. So you also need to make sure it is simple enough that people are like, oh, what is that? Tell me more. Like, what do you mean? So that's another thing to think about from a sales context.
If it can spark their curiosity, you got them going.
And I think that's Michelle, that's really important point is it's something that we didn't talk about is what is this for? What is the elevator pitch for? So it's a bait that you're trying to catch something. So what is the outcome of your elevator pitch? And the outcome of the elevator pitch is the next step, right? So you can measure the effectiveness of the elevator pitch is how many next steps do you get? If you get very little next steps, then it's either not understandable or something is going on. It's just yet another. It's a harbinger of you going back to the drawing board and just thinking about it. If you're not getting a lot of next steps, that there's a concern. There's something wrong with it.
That's so powerful as a reminder. Sergey, I just want to underscore that because the goal of the elevator pitch should not be money in your bank account from an investor, right? It should be the next step, the next meeting. And in fact, most of the outcomes from your pitches or your investor discussions should be the next meeting, because it's almost never that you're going to get investment after even a handful of meetings. It's likely to take a handful for them to even get comfortable that they would consider investing. So you just have to walk in with that as sort of your base expectation. So you're not walking to the altar after the elevator ride and the other person's still trying to figure out what your first name is.
All right. Well, that's the last slide on my spiel, and gonna hand it off to Jason.
Awesome. Thanks, Sergey. Just great discussion. So I tried to not make this too prescriptive, but really there is a recipe for making a good elevator pitch. You've seen all the ingredients already. It's really talking about who you are, what you do in plain English, exactly the way Sergey set it up. Rudy made a great point about the why or the reason why you do it. I think there is an element of that keeping it short. Then we're going to talk a little more about the commercial. But the last 3 steps are important. And we're doing this virtually, so it's going to be a little bit different. But in general, and something you can just go do on your own, is just practice it in front of the mirror. And one thing I always recommend is to record yourself giving your pitch. Just take your cell phone, record it, record yourself doing it, and then kind of shake it off and then watch it and see what it's like. And it's the hardest thing you can do, is watch yourself presenting or giving an elevator pitch or anything like that. It's just hard. It's human nature. But if you record it and you watch it and you're like, oh, wow, that's what I sound like, that's how it comes across, then you'll get better if you watch yourself do it. So this is good, I think, today, because we're not really set up to watch ourselves do it. We'll have some, pitching for the group and giving feedback. But after today, certainly, if you can record yourself on your phone and do it and refine it, very, very powerful to be able to do. So these are kind of the basic steps.
Can I chime in on that point?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
One thing is, when we write things, we don't always write like we speak, so a lot of times I think if people try to just memorize something, it's going to come across like that. Like, I just memorized what I wrote. It's like, you really have to put it in your own words, and so it's okay to write it and then have that be the basis of which, so you've got your points, but then say it over and over again until it's in your own words. And even if you need to tweak how you write it so that it is more like your own words, because you need to have your personality come across in the whole thing as well. So you don't want to feel all stilted like I memorized something. Everybody, we all did that in school, right? You had to memorize something. It never came across very well. So just be yourself and just hit your bullet points.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, we talk about doing things in plain English, keeping it very simple and easy to understand. One thing you can do, especially if there's more than one of you going out and talking about your idea and pitching it, you can create a framework that says, hey, here's what we do as a company or as an organization or a startup. You can say, hey, we want to be the Uber for dog walking. Great. You can then layer in the next part of saying, well, and my role in Uber for dog walking is this. So you can say, I'm the CTO, I'm founding, I'm doing, some particular contribution that's important. And so you can take, the corporate or company framework that you share with others and then add a personal layer to it. And as soon as you say something that's not just generic about what your company or product does, but you start to talk about what your involvement is, you just naturally speak from the heart and make it more personal. So in addition to having that everyday English, I think we've talked about a lot, but make it personal is another way to layer in something about how it connects to you and then helps you connect to the person you're speaking with. I think we've talked about keeping the language simple and avoiding jargon and acronyms. I think we've run that one well to ground. So I don't know. I hope that most people on this watching have at least watched the TED Talk and Start With Why, the book. Sinex built this whole brand on this idea. But one thing you can do, instead of just saying, oh, what, like we want to be, Uber for dog walking, you can start to, talk about the cause or the reason why it's important. You can say, wow, people love their animals and they really wish they could be home to walk them all the time, but they really can't. So we want to help solve that problem. So you can always find ways to restructure and play with what you're talking about, the message that you're giving, to bring in kind of that purpose or the reason. And certainly the what is important, but you can play around with how you order and the words you use, and kind of going from the inside out, from the outside in, and see what works. And I've seen pitches be very successful going in any order around here, but as you start to decompose it, think about how you layer in different aspects. I don't know, is Start With Why kind of feeling long in the tooth to anybody else, or is this still like head nodding and pretty powerful message?
It works.
Yeah, and it's I think it is used a lot, but it's still not the common approach. I mean, I hear more startup pitches than most, and it is not used nearly as much as it should.
And I've seen it used slightly differently. It's more first who, then what, then how. But again, the idea is the same, right? You're just moving, and it also depends on the stage of the company and whatnot. And there's if you're trying to get the next meeting, in the first who, then what, then how, the idea of who's involved with the company and why you're the best people to solve this problem is critical. But it's probably a little outside of the timelines of the pitch itself.
Yep. And Rudy just had that great point of, what you're trying to do is in the first 10 seconds, earn the next 20 seconds, and then the next 20 seconds, earn the next discussion or the next meeting, give them enough to want to come back for more.
And one more thing I would say, I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek and the Simon Sinek and Start With Why. But I think in this context, especially, the purpose could almost also be substituted more with the problem. I think focusing on the problem itself and then breaking it down to how you got to your product from there can be really valuable. Having a cause obviously is important, but if your cause isn't necessarily a problem to your consumers in the way that you think it is, then that, there can be that disconnect. So that's another way to look at it as well, I think.
Well, and today the case for a computer, or even like a computer that fits in your hand that's also your phone, those cases are now plainly obvious. And so you might differentiate that way. There, if you're really trying to do true category creation, that might come with a bit of explanation needed if you're trying to do something that's not, plainly obvious to the people you're speaking with. But that could be a whole nother session just on how you create something new that no one's seen before. Well, let's keep moving. And so I think about, kind of commercials and 30 seconds and what you can really say. And one example I want to give, and I didn't want to use a screenshot of this, but if you think about the commercials you see, especially for like prescription medication, the list of like possible side effects, requirements, caveats, that's a whole heck of a lot of information that they're able to convey in 30 seconds or sometimes even 15. And so when you think about it, now no one remembers what the terrible list of side effects you could get from taking that medication is, but it's a lot of data. So when you think about it, that 30 seconds, you can get across a lot, and maybe you do have a niche or highly technical solution that you're trying to describe. You can get a lot done. 30 seconds can seem like an eternity when you're doing these pitches. But also, when you think about Rudy's comment on storytelling, really effective commercials do set up a problem and a conflict, and they tell a mini story. And sometimes at the end, you're like, ooh, that is interesting, or I can see how that would solve a problem. So you can almost think about the different elements you might plug into an elevator pitch. Maybe you would have something that sets up the problem. Maybe you'd have something that, creates a sense of interest in this new product or new category. And depending on if you have a sense of who you're talking to, is this just a random stranger? Is it somebody who already is in or understands your space? And you can kind of tailor which sound bites to work in. And if you do it enough, it just becomes second nature. You start to read the situation and layer that in. But I think one thing that you want to have in your elevator pitch is a clear close. At the end, commercials at the very end, they want you to go do something. Go buy a product, visit a store, visit a website. There's a call to action. So just make sure that at the end of your elevator pitch, you have something strong that you want them to do next.
Can I chime in real quick?
Yeah, please.
One thing you just said was that struck me is it's not the same pitch for everything too. You have to know your audience. I mean, I know if you're gonna pitch to an investor, not all investors are the same, right? They come from different backgrounds, and they may have different points that will resonate with them. So you should know who you're talking to if you ever have the opportunity, who you're talking to before you do, so that if you can tweak your pitch to that audience.
Yep, absolutely. And get them to, ask a question back if you can. So really great point. So, I know we want to give, time to actually do this in an interactive way today. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to try to maybe set like a 3 or 5 minute timer and kind of give everybody who's now part of the, the audience to maybe sketch out their pitch, come in, send chat questions that we can respond to while you're working it out. And then we can actually have people practice live. But like I said, even after this, record yourself on your cell phone doing your pitch. That is really the key to getting better is doing that self-reflection exercise as well. But Michelle, I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully you've got a song or two to let people prepare.
Yeah.
I was going to say one last thing I was going to say from the last slide is, 30 seconds, as you said, it can be a long time. And so my suggestion is if you go beyond 30 seconds is just to talk a lot faster with your, I'm just kidding. Says the guy who talks really slowly from the middle of the country. So I think what we all know is it's way harder to say less than to say more. And so one of the reasons to practice is to really figure out how to be efficient with your language.
Words are hard. I mean, you can agonize a lot over the words you use to talk about who you are and what you do.
All right. So I actually, before we start, I have a little timer, but I wanted to share something out that was created by someone who's on the webinar with us, Malcolm, who actually works with Sergey at Certemi. And if you want a sort of template or to play around with, this is a great resource, and you can use this right now or take a look at it later. And I'm going to go ahead and get our timer up and give you some time to work on your pitch, and then we'll go ahead and do some practice together. Max, you want to go ahead and finish us up with your taxi cab and any other feedback that you want to share?
Sure. Okay. Float. Picking up where the credit bureaus stopped innovating so consumers can use their credit data for more. And then since I have your attention, I'll do the full one. Float was built for families, business owners, and young up-and-comers who want less risk and more sound financial decisions and need to know the credit situations of others, but the credit bureaus make it costly, difficult, and intrusive. Float provides instant proxies for creditworthiness with free access and mutability between individuals to help customers overcome the lack of control and privacy of the standard credit report and achieve clear financial decisions and peace of mind faster than anyone else.
Now that I hear it for the second time, I think it resonates. The follow-up questions would be, or a follow-up question would be, why would people need to know my credit history that are dealing with me, not on the business level? But I think I think then it got the point across that I was curious enough. I understood what it is, and I was curious, right? So maybe if a takeaway would be to explain why is that a problem.
Kind of lost me in the middle. You had me at the beginning, and then I started understanding again at the end. But the middle, I don't know. It was a lot, and you lost me in between. So
yeah, I think you hit the word mutability, and then my brain started to search for the correct in context definition of the word mutability, and then I stopped listening.
Got it.
So I think so simple. If we can simplify even that one word, it might help stay engaged.
Got it. Simplify the language. Makes sense.
I would say too that for me, I do think the word proxy is a little fancy as well. I obviously, depending on who your audience is, it might resonate, but I think the average person might be like, what does he mean by that? So even just using the word trust and kind of lowering the bar for trust or however you would redefine that might make it a little simpler as well.
Oh, you can use conduit instead. I think that's better. Just kidding.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you guys for jumping on today, and thank you for everybody who participated and gave your pitch. It's a very hard thing to do in front of strangers, so I applaud you. And like Jason said, continue to practice, record yourself, do it in front of a mirror. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes, and then I think it does feel less rehearsed. So it's definitely an experiment with different things because you're probably going to be changing things all the time. So in terms of next steps, if you are a member of OC4 and you'd like to schedule a one-on-one with any of our coaches to continue practicing your pitch, then you are able to do that through our member portal, or you can also reach out to me and I'll help facilitate that for you. And for everybody else in the community, part 2 of our sales messaging series is next Thursday, and it is defining your value proposition is the area of focus. And again, that's next Thursday, 4 p.m., same time. And if you have any questions about anything, you can reach me. My email is michelle@oc4v.com. And thank you so much, coaches, for jumping on today and sharing your feedback.
Thank you so much, guys.
Great work, everyone. Thanks for being bold and sharing. You know, it's hard to do, but just get out there and do it.
Yeah.
All right.
Everybody. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.